Now let's look at another focus of this G7 summit, Africa. Specifically, migration from Africa into Europe. This is a major issue for the G7 host nation, Italy in particular, and for the rest of Europe in general, represented by Macron, Scholz and the EU delegates. Meloni, of course, is at the forefront here because Italy is in southern Europe, surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea, and therefore it receives thousands of migrants who often leave Africa on ramshackle boats organized by human trafficking gangs.
Africa, with its difficulties, its opportunities, asks us for a different approach than we have often shown in the past. Linked to Africa, not just Africa, is another fundamental issue that Italy has put at the center of the presidency, which is the issue of migration and the increasingly worrying role that human trafficking organizations are taking on, clearly exploiting the desperation of human beings.
About 22,000 people have arrived in Italy via boat this year. Last year, this number was at 150,000 people, and this is not a safe journey. The migrants had to brave the Mediterranean Sea, where rough weather takes a toll. About 2,000 migrants died or went missing last year. Thousands of others had to be rescued. The boat journey from Africa is perilous. But every year, thousands upon thousands still try to make the voyage. Why is that? For two reasons. The first is that they're seeking asylum. There are a number of insurgencies in Africa. Terrorists have taken over vast areas in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. Even Nigeria faces an insurgency by Boko Haram, so you can understand why people are fleeing their homes. They want to escape the violence. So that's one reason for the illegal migration from Africa. But it's not the only reason. The other reason is economic opportunity. Africa was once almost completely colonized by Europeans. Europe carved the continent up and exploited it for generations. Independence came after decades, when Europe had already looted the continent dry. What was left was political instability and widespread poverty. Africa still hasn't recovered, and many are fed up. Instead of waiting for their countries to advance, they want to go to the land of the colonizers and share in the wealth that should have been theirs. But Europe isn't as rich as it once was. Recent events like the war in Ukraine have dealt them a blow. Europeans across nations are going through a cost of living crisis. In this situation, they don't want more mouths to feed, so they want to put an end to illegal immigration. Now, Europe does hold the blame for poverty in Africa. They created the problem that they now face. So how do they end it? Giorgia Meloni has a simple plan. Invest some of Europe's wealth in Africa, create jobs and economic opportunities. Meloni thinks that this will reverse the trend of illegal migration, at least migration for economic purposes. And Meloni calls it the Mattei plan.
The first one is that all of us, we understand that Africa is not looking for charity. They ask for the possibility to compete on an equal footing. And you cannot do that if you don't have infrastructures. So we understand it, and we know it is the priority we have to work on. For too long, Africa has been misunderstood and exploited, looked down or from above. But Africa is instead a continent that can surprise if put in the conditions to take advantage of what is extraordinary about it. It is up to us to collaborate with African nations and to build with them new development opportunities with a peer-to-peer approach in order to grow together.
And she wants it adopted by as many countries as possible. The G7 summit serves as the perfect venue for her to advance her agenda. She brought together two sets of leaders, the rich G7 members and leaders from Africa. Now, Meloni invited the leaders of Algeria, Tunisia, Mauritania and Kenya. She hoped that the African delegation will make a strong case for her plan. Meloni had invited Arab leaders as well, like Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who could have been another source of investments for Africa, but MBS could not make it to Italy because of other commitments. But even though Meloni's Saudi outreach did not work out, her overall plan is still in motion. If the G7 summit generates investments for Africa, Giorgia Meloni can call it a success. It will take a while for her plan to start working, but it is a step in the right direction. Investing in Africa is a smart thing to do, so hopefully the West follows through with Meloni's plan. Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As the G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who is invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost. Fan of Italy's famous cuisine? Well, we are serving it with a side of diplomacy. As G7 leaders gather in southern Italy, Vantage is taking you to the heart of the action. What's the agenda? Who is invited? And how is Italy preparing for it? Catch the special edition of Vantage throughout this week, only on Firstpost.